We're going to talk about a tragedy that happened in a small town in West Virginia. But this isn't just a story about one horrific act. It's a story that really forces us to ask some tough questions. Questions about responsibility, about warning signs that were missed, and about the systems we're supposed to trust to protect kids.
Okay, so let's set the scene. This is Williamsburg, West Virginia, and the date is December 8th, 2020. On this day, this quiet community was just completely shattered by an act of violence that's pretty much unimaginable.
And the human cost was just immediate and devastating. 6 lives were lost. 5 of them were just children. To really understand the full picture here, we have to start by confronting the terrible facts of what actually happened on that day.
The person at the center of all this was 25-year-old Oreanna Myers. She was the biological mother to 3 of the children and the stepmother to the other 2. In just a single afternoon, she shot all 5 of them. They were just between 1 and 7 years old, set their home on fire, and then took her own life. This event became the single worst mass shooting in the history of West Virginia. So to really get a handle on what happened, it's so important to look at the timeline, because it shows you just how quickly a day that seemed completely normal could spiral into an absolute nightmare.
At first, the day looked totally ordinary. At 2:30 in the afternoon, Myers picks up 2 of her kids from the bus stop. But just 1 hour later, she had murdered all 5 children with a shotgun and started the fire. By the time fire crews arrived at 3:50, the home was already heavily damaged. Her body was found outside about 40 minutes after that, the weapon right there beside her. In her car, investigators found 3 handwritten suicide notes, and in those notes, she confessed to the killings and apologized to her husband.
One of those notes had this chillingly clear statement: "This is no one's fault but my own." She claimed full responsibility. But as investigators were about to find out, that was not even close to the whole story. A much more complicated and, frankly, a much more disturbing picture was about to come out.
And this brings us to the really crucial part of this story, the history of warnings that were seemingly ignored. It forces us to ask the question, was this tragedy really inevitable? The question that just hangs over this entire case is the one her note tried to answer. Was this tragedy really no one's fault but her own? Well, a pattern of red flags suggests something else was going on. As far back as 2016, the children had actually been removed from her care because of neglect. More recently, a dentist had seen one of the children with a large bruise and noted the child seemed scared of their father. And then, just a few months before the massacre, the children's father was seen verbally abusing one of them.
That incident of verbal abuse, well, it led to a direct call to Child Protective Services on August 10, 2020. That's just 4 months before the murders. A call was made to the very system that's designed to step in. And what happened after that call? Nothing. The operator ended the call. The person who reported it was told there would be no investigation. A critical window to intervene to potentially save these children was just slammed shut.
That one phone call, that single dismissal, had enormous consequences. The failure to act didn't just end with a tragedy. It put the entire child welfare system on trial, and it led to a major lawsuit against West Virginia's Department of Health and Human Resources. So, the DHHR, that's the state agency responsible for child welfare. They're the ones who run Child Protective Services, and they were supposed to be the last line of defense for these children. The lawsuit, which was filed by the biological mother of 2 of the victims, laid out a stunning series of allegations. It claimed the DHR had received and ignored multiple reports of abuse. And on top of that, it alleged that the agency knew Oreanna Myers had an active arrest warrant out against her, but failed to act on that information.
So the exposure of all these systemic failures, well, it led to some pretty significant consequences and major calls for reform within the state's child welfare system.
The fallout from this case was just immense. The DHHR wasn't just sued, it was ultimately ordered to be dissolved entirely. In response to that missed warning call, Child Protective Services was forced to implement a new protocol. All intake calls would now be recorded. And at the state level, senators started pushing for broader reforms of the entire broken system. The dismantling of the DHHR is really the most telling outcome here. The agency was broken up into 3 separate organizations in 2023, and it was a direct result of what was officially described as apparent mismanagement. Oreanna Myers wrote that the fault was hers and hers alone, but the aftermath tells a very different story, doesn't it? It's one of missed opportunities and systemic failures, and it leaves us with a really difficult and lingering question. When a tragedy is preventable, where does accountability truly lie?